Morning. Hi, everyone. Hi. Okay, so plan for today's live stream. I'm going to go through the topic of person of Jesus. This is a really good topic. I really like this topic. Like a lot of the topics that we go through, there are three sections. So we like topics with sections. So there's three main areas that you might get a question asked in the exam. And so you've got human versus divine, Jesus, the teacher of wisdom, and Jesus, the liberator. So we're going to work through each of the sections. But if at any point or any part of the section that you have a question on, just pop it at the side. That's not a problem at all. And I can go through those areas. So you might have a few questions with this one because I'm not going to go through it in a lot of detail. But you can go and read any parts further that you're interested in, because this one is like I say, it's a really good one that you can get your teeth into. So the first section that you need to know about and that you could get asked a question in your exam is human versus divine. So what that means is, was Jesus human? Was Jesus divine? Or was he a bit of both? And how much human, how much divine was he? So it's the question about the nature of Jesus. And it also questions the idea of, did Jesus actually know? So did Jesus know that he was human? Did Jesus know that he was the Son of God? Did Jesus know he was divine? How much of this did Jesus know? So you've got a few things that you can talk about and look at. For example, Son of God was a title given to Jesus in the New Testament. Jesus never called himself the Son of God. So Jesus, this was a name given to him. He did call God Abba, which does mean Father, Greek for Father. So it is translated as Father. But he never himself called himself Son. So this is a phrase that we give to Jesus, not one that he gave himself. So if Jesus was human, so if he was kind of a hybrid, please don't call him that in the exam, but if Jesus was a hybrid between part human, part divine, if he was human, how much human was he? So, for example, St. Augustine, as we know, says that everybody is sinful. So does that mean Jesus was sinful? Was Jesus born with sin? Was Jesus corrupt like everybody else? Did Jesus have free will? FW, free will. Did Jesus have free will? Was he free to do, or was he fulfilling prophecies that he had to do? Was he just once again on this predestined path to do certain things, or was it free will? What knowledge did Jesus have? Did Jesus have all knowledge? Was he omnipotent, omniscient as far as his knowledge? Was he all knowing? Did he know all of creation, everyone, or did he again have human knowledge? And finally, did he know he was the Savior? Did he know that he was going to die? Did he know that he was going to save us? So there's a lot of rhetorical questions there. You're welcome to explore possible answers, but just posing the question is absolutely fine as well. The belief as well is that Jesus had to be divine to some extent. Why? Well, Jesus couldn't save and have a redemptive power. Jesus couldn't save us from our sins and give us eternal life in heaven and reward us, the sheep and the goats. Jesus couldn't have done any of that if he didn't have some divine nature. And when you use the word divine, give it a capital D as well. Don't forget, obviously, give God and Jesus and everyone else capitals. So divine, he must have had some divine nature in order to be able to save us. He had to be divine and able to grant miracles. We're going to come back to miracles shortly. He had to have some divine element because otherwise, how did he resurrect? If Jesus didn't resurrect, and Hick's going to come in with this as well. But if Jesus didn't come back from the dead after the 3 days, he's no different from anybody else. So he had to have a divine quality or a divine nature in order to be able to do that. But Jesus also, if you're divine, if you're God, how do you die? The dying part is the human part. So Jesus had to have a human element in order to die. Finally, as well, if Jesus was fully divine and not human, then on the cross, well, you can't hurt God, you can't give pain to divine. So Jesus had to be human in order to feel the pain of being crucified. So a lot of people do believe that Jesus is both, that he is both human and divine. But that's what you would have to explore. Do you think that Jesus is both? Or do you think he was purely divine, separated from us as human beings? Or do you believe Jesus was just a human, that he was a human that was able to connect with people in a special way? So you need to decide where you fall. You are welcome to go down the middle with this one, that he is both, but again, you need to argue it. You've got quite a good quote from the Ecumenical Documents of Faith, truly God and truly man. It's argued that he has two natures in one person. So let's have a look now at a few names of how people have described Jesus. And as promised, we have Rayner and his onion analogy. Really, I like this one. And yes, it is covered in Shrek. There have been many, many years and many students that have got an awful lot of pleasure out of telling me that this is just like on Shrek. I've not seen Shrek, so I'm going to take your word for it. But what Rayner argues is that Jesus can be compared as like an onion, and the outer layers of skin, so the outer layers of the onion, are Jesus' human nature. That's his self-awareness. He's aware of his humanity, whereas the inner core of the onion is his consciousness of divine. So that's his link with God. And so Jesus as an onion shows the layers of Jesus' consciousness, what he is and isn't maybe aware of, but it's still part of Jesus, part of the same person. So I like that one. You then have Gerald O. Collins. He says, because we have no writings from Jesus. Now, this is quite an interesting, and again, if you like your conspiracy theories, chances are Jesus might have maybe written some things down. We're just not, we don't have them. They haven't been published in the Bible for whatever reason they might have been. Maybe they spoke of things that were too controversial to be added into the Bible. Who knows? But because we, at this point, what we have access to, we do not have access to any of Jesus' writings, if Jesus ever made any. We don't know what Jesus thought as far as his human versus divine nature. So we just don't know. What we do know, though, and we've got a couple of quotes here from Gerald O'Connell, we do know that Jesus had a unique relationship with God. There was a uniqueness to that relationship, and also that Jesus was on a mission of salvation. Jesus was on a mission to save us, whether that's save our souls for heaven, whether that was saving from the Roman occupation, whether that was to save people, a bit like Acts 17 with St. Paul, the idea of giving people that revelation, that proper understanding of God. Maybe that was how Jesus was saving us, and he could do that as a human. However, John Hick does come in as well. John Hick says that Jesus had to be the incarnation of God. Jesus had to be God made flesh. That's the incarnation. God becomes flesh as Jesus. Jesus had to be there. Otherwise, Jesus is no different from anybody else, as far as no different from Moses, no different from Guru Nanak, who had messages, no different from Muhammad. It's the idea that Jesus had to be God made flesh in order to be different from the others that brought messages from God. Finally, C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis says that Jesus had to be both. He had to be both teacher, so a good moral teacher, as well as the Son of God. Why? Because if Jesus was just a good teacher, but that good teacher was saying, I'm linked in some way, special relationship with God, then how can you be a good teacher when you're saying that? So you can't have one without having the other. Otherwise, what he says is that would just make him a lunatic, that you'd be a lunatic like the person that believes they're a poached egg. Don't ask me where they get these comparisons from, but C.S. Lewis says that you'd be like the lunatic that believes you're a poached egg if you're a good moral teacher saying I'm the Son of God, or a devil sent to hell, a devil of hell. So he's saying that again, Jesus had to be both, because you can't go around saying the things you say unless and be a good moral teacher unless it is the truth. So that's the section on human and divine. We'll just do a little bit on miracles as well, which can all link in. So the little bit here on miracles, because again, if Jesus wasn't divine, then he couldn't actually do miracles. But the question around miracles are believed to still happen today through the Holy Spirit, HS, Holy Spirit. But the question around miracles is, are these a metaphor? So are miracles real? Did miracles really happen, or were they a metaphor for something else? Did they symbolize something bigger or something more? And so this idea of miracles, where do miracles fall? Are miracles, are miracles, did they really happen by Jesus, or were they just symbolic? So let's have a look at some of the miracle examples. The other question surrounding miracles is, what is the aim of the writers? So this is a very interesting way of looking at the Bible. Look at who actually wrote the passages. So I don't mean literally look at who wrote them, but we know Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John wrote biblical passages. Why did they say the things that they said? What was their political movement? What was their reason behind talking about these miracles? Was there actually a reason why these miracles were written down? And was it more of a political move rather than actually something Jesus was even doing? So it's interesting to think about where these stories have come from. We are getting them secondhand. So what's happened? Think of those Chinese whispers. Think of news reporters. Think about what really happens and then what the news tells you. And that's exactly what we're getting as far as the Bible. So are these a metaphor, or were they a political move? And again, we'll come back to that in a second. So as far as miracles are concerned, N.T. Wright actually makes a very, very good point here. I really like N.T. Wright's point here. And I always remember it as N.T. New Testament, easy enough to remember. So N.T. Wright, what he says is that these miracles that were done by Jesus are not just special because he broke down the laws of nature and showed power. It was actually the people that he helped. Jesus didn't help those in power. Jesus didn't help those people that were rich or the authority. He helped the down and outs. He helped the people that were separated from society. He helped the lepers, the paupers, the tax collectors, the women. He helped people that were not seen as far as a certain class in society. And that's very, very interesting, is that. So this was about Jesus being a man of the people, and that's exactly who he helped. It was the people. So you had a number of activities around miracles to do. Looking at the miracles in the Bible, you can look at them up online if you don't have a Bible at home. Absolutely no problem at all. If you struggle to find the correct biblical passage, just send me a message and I can help you, direct you, because obviously some Bibles are slightly different as far as where the miracles can be found, etc., and slightly different translations. If you again, a Bible, just read it like a normal book. So there's contents pages that will help you find the relevant pages of the story that you're looking for. You don't have to just flick through until you find it. So there is a contents page, so do use that to help you. And on the sheet, it's about looking at the deeper meaning, other explanations of those miracles. So it's important that you do that sheet at some point. But 3 miracles that you can talk about in your exam. You don't have to talk about all 3 of these or in any sort of depth or detail. We're not here to tell stories in the exam. But there are 3 that we look at together, or would have looked at together in class. And the 3 are the bleeding woman, the healing of the blind, and the resurrection. And so the bleeding woman, sorry, can't even say it there. The bleeding woman, the woman had been bleeding for about 12 years, something like that. Jesus was walking along the street and she touched his cloak and she was healed. And Jesus turned around and said, who's touched me? I mean, you won't be that impressed if you're just walking along and some person starts touching your clothing. Who touched me? And she said, I'm sorry, Jesus, I've been bleeding. And he was like, okay, well, I'll heal you, but next time just don't touch me. But I will heal you. And he healed this woman. Now, miracle, yes, healed her, doesn't bleed anymore. That's not the important part. The important part is a woman touched him publicly that was not his wife. Scandalous. Totally scandalous. Front page news. The woman would have been stoned or put to death, or something horrendous would have happened to that woman, because that's what happened in the time. And so for the woman to have done that was very, very naughty. But rather than Jesus reacting, rather than Jesus saying, oh, you've touched me, banished her away. No, he communicated with her, he healed her, he had that conversation with her. So it showed that Jesus was very, very much about the people, including women, and helping women. So again, very much like N.T. Wright, this was about Jesus helping people that were excluded, including a woman that had been bleeding for 12 years. Next one was the blind story. Beggar was blind. Jesus went over, covered his eyes, open your eyes now, and he could see. And it's the idea there, again, is this a metaphor? That he saw Jesus, saw his faith, saw God? Is it a metaphor that he actually, that his blindness was lifted to God? Or was he actually blind? Well, again, this story is not interesting. Well, it is interesting, of course, but it's not interesting because Jesus healed him. It's because of what happened afterwards. Now, the Pharisees, Jesus was not well liked in his society. Jesus was not well liked at all by the people in charge. And the Pharisees had a lot of problems with him. Why? Because they couldn't control him. They didn't know what Jesus was going to do. He was a rebel of the time. He was uncontrollable. He rallied together the masses. They went against the people in charge. He was a troublemaker. And so when it came to the blind man being able to see again, Jesus healed him. The Pharisees were not happy. How can this man do this? And so what they did was they did an investigation. They investigated this man to see actually, he wasn't really blind. You just planted him there, haven't you, Jesus, and pretended to heal him. What they actually found was he was genuinely blind and he now can see. And so they actually investigated to see and asked, however they did it, to see whether he was blind previous to it. And he was. They still, however, did not accept it. So they did not accept that Jesus had healed this person. The final one, of course, is the resurrection. Jesus died, speared to the side, buried, 3 days later, rose from the dead, miracle. Rose from the dead to save us, to show eternal life in heaven, to show that following Christ means that you will be saved. And again, that was the miracle there. So pretty big chunk section, but we like plenty to talk about, plenty to talk questions, plenty of things to get your teeth stuck into. So again, you could get a question on human and divine, you could get a question on miracles, you could get a question on any of those areas, but all of that is relevant to bring in. So if you do have any questions about that section, please do just jump in, and I'll start the next section in just a sec, because the next section's a bit more straightforward. Okay, so the next section that you could get asked a question on is Jesus as teacher of wisdom. So Jesus as a teacher. Now, Jesus as a teacher, even Dawkins, we haven't had a bit from Dawkins for a while. Dawkins jumps on this bandwagon and says that Jesus was a great moral teacher, must have woke up on the good side of bed that morning. And then if you link that with the C.S. Lewis, you're getting quite an interesting argument there, quite an interesting link. So even Dawkins actually is supportive of Jesus and his moral teachings. Jesus, a teacher of wisdom. Jesus could read. We do know this, so Jesus could read. He was a preacher at the synagogue. Don't forget, Jesus was a Jew. He wasn't a Christian. Christianity came after he died, so Jesus was a Jew. Preacher at the synagogue. He was seen as a rabbi, which is a teacher. He gave controversial stories to get people interested, to help people understand him. Because don't forget, most of his audience couldn't read or write. So he had to tell stories to get people engaged, to understand the messages that he wanted. So he was a very charismatic speaker. One of the most famous speeches that he did was the Sermon on the Mount. Sermon, like what a preacher would do. Mount, it was on a mountain or a hillside. So that's why it was just Sermon on the Mount is exactly what it was. He talked on a hill. It was found in Matthew, and it starts with what are called the Beatitudes. Now, the Beatitudes are blessed are. So, blessed are the meek, blessed are the pure of heart, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. And there's about 8 to 10 of these. I recommend you learn 3. Pick 3, learn 3. That will be enough to show and examine you have knowledge and understanding. What I would do is, though, I would pick the ones that you could maybe link to a recent example. So pick one and then find an example of something that's happening in modern day to show how Jesus' moral teachings can be transferred. That's really good. Any opportunity to get a modern day example, show that you're connected with the news, connected with what's going on, is really good stuff for an exam. Beatitudes, obviously the golden rule is there. If you're ever unsure of where to find Jesus's teachings, or you're talking about something that Jesus said and you're not sure where to find it, just say you found it in the Sermon on the Mount, because pretty much everything is in that sermon. If you missed that, if you slept in on the Sermon on the Mount day, you missed out big time. Everything was in the Sermon on the Mount. So that was something not to miss. We can summarize Jesus' moral teachings into 5. Now, I do this in order to give you something in order to plump your essays out with. So you don't have to call them the 5. You don't have to number them. You don't have to order them. You don't have to put all 5 in there. This is purely just to give you some areas to discuss. So I think there's 5 main areas that represent Jesus' moral teachings. The first is agape. So we know agape now. We know Joseph Fletcher, situation ethics, St. Paul helping quarrel in Christian communities, etc. So have a look into agape. Have a look how Jesus promoted unconditional love for others, etc. Second one, justice, mercy, and forgiveness. This idea that Jesus promoted the idea of being just, being merciful, and being forgiving. Now, the example you could give for this one is the adulterous woman. So I'll quickly go over the adulterous woman story. So basically, a woman had been accused of being an adulteress. Jesus walks along, as he does, with his people, with his disciples, and they say, Jesus, come over here. She's broke one of your God's rules. She's broken, she's an adulteress. And in the Bible it says, or in your book it says, we have to stone her. Here's your stone, Jesus. Crack on. And so at this point, Jesus is now under pressure. Do I stone this woman, killing her? Or do I then go against the teachings of the Old Testament? Do I go against the teachings of the Son of God? Do I go against teachings of God and not throw that stone? So Jesus was in a bit of a conundrum, and the people that asked him to do that knew. There was a massive crowd, massive audience. It was, what is Jesus going to do? Is he going to follow the law and stone this woman, or is he going to break the law, break the 10 commandments that say do not be an adulteress, etc., and not punish this woman? So Jesus gets down in the ground and starts to write in the sand, probably just like thinking, oh my goodness, what am I going to do? So he's kind of counting himself a bit of time, and he stands up and then he says, he who is without sin throws the first stone. And so what happens there is that everybody then drops their stone and leaves. And it's the idea that you can only judge somebody else if you are without sin yourself. So he who is without sin can throw the first stone, or throw a stone. And it's the idea that you cannot stone this woman, even if you're not an adulteress yourself, you cannot stone this woman if you have sinned in some other way yourself. One of the 10 commandments is respect your mother and father. So if you've ever not respected your mother and father, you're sinful. So what happened was the crowds then left, leaving Jesus there. Now, whether Jesus would have been able to throw that stone or not, was he sinful or not, we don't know, because there was nobody there to continue the story as far as what happened. But what he did there was the idea of he saved that woman by saying that you cannot judge her unless you are without sin yourself. And this is where the idea of people in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. We are all made of glass. We are all sinful. That one stone, if you throw a stone at somebody else, they can throw a stone straight right back at you. Unless you are without sin, you cannot judge others. So that's where that came from, this idea of mercy and forgiveness. Service and humility. So this is another one that Jesus showed. So another teaching of him is service and humility. An example that you could give for this one is the washing of the feet. So Jesus, and again, this is why this topic, I really like this topic, because you have got some stories, you can get involved. And the Bible is a pretty decent read. It's got some really good stories there. Have a look at the Brick Testament if you're not interested in reading the Bible as it is, because the stories themselves are really quite good. But the washing of the feet. So Jesus goes round to his mate's house on Friday night, whenever it is, and he sits there with his disciples. And obviously, because of where they lived and their feet in sandals. Didn't wear socks with their sandals back then, don't wear them now. So he had his feet in his sandals, filthy, dirty, disgusting feet. So the tradition of the time, or the what people used to do at the time, was they used to wash. You had to wash your feet. And so because Jesus, for the disciples, because Jesus was their king, he was their savior, he was the person they looked up to the most in the world, they wanted to wash Jesus's feet. They wanted to serve Jesus. And what Jesus said was, no, I don't want you to wash my feet. I'm going to wash your feet, because I want you to go out and serve everybody else, whether you think you're above them or not. I want you to go and serve everybody else. So I need to show to you through serving you first. And so Jesus showed service and humility. Humility is being humble. It's when you're not arrogant. So it's not a week later, Jesus going, hey, I washed your feet. Come on, come do something. No, you cannot throw it back in somebody's face. To be humble, you have to just do these things without expecting anything in return. So the disciples were obviously very, very shocked and were like, no, Jesus, you can't touch our feet. Don't touch our feet. And he was like, no, let me please wash your feet. It is kind of like the Queen asking to wash your feet. You would be very, obviously she's a 90-year-old lady as well, but this is just not something that would happen. But that's exactly who Jesus was to them. He was their king, saying, no, let me serve you. So that showed the service and humility. Honesty and integrity. Be honest, be open, be true to yourself. And finally, spirituality, not materialism. Focus on your spirit, not material possessions. Don't be greedy. And the example that be given in this is the camel through the eye of a needle idea. So where that has come from is an actual place. I think it may be in Jerusalem. I can't quite remember where it is. But it's the idea of there's a certain gateway that when a camel is laden down with bags, all the bags on all its sides, etc., it can't actually get through the doorway. It can't get through the gateway. So when you've laden it with all its wealth and riches and things and material things, it can't get through the eye of a needle. And so this is where the ideas come from. Of it's easier to get through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. When you can't take all your money bags with you to heaven, you can't fit through the heaven gates with all your riches, just like the camel can't through that gateway through the eye of the needle with all its bags. So again, quite a good story. So those are the teachings, the main teachings that you could talk about, but obviously anything works for Jesus. So if you want to talk about feeding the 5,000 or one of his miracles specifically, crack on. That is the beauty of DCT topics. And some of your essays that I've read so far, thank you for sending them through. I've really shown that you've just really kind of jumped into it. These topics you can jump into and explore and go down different paths. It's very uncontrolled, is this one, which is good. And this is why, again, you can get some really good marks here. So any questions about that section before I do the final bit? All right, fab. So, final section. Apologies that you can't see it very well because it's right at the bottom of the board, but the picture is posted on the Facebook and the Twitter, so do just find the picture later. Jesus as Liberator. Now, this is where it starts to become a little bit controversial and quite interesting. So it's the view that Jesus actually was a rebel, that he was a religious, political and social revolutionary. He was the Malcolm X of the time. He was campaigning against the people in charge, whether that was the Roman occupation, the Pharisees, etc. But Jesus caused trouble. That is why eventually he was crucified. He wasn't crucified for religious reasons. He wasn't crucified for being a heretic. He was crucified because of a civic crime, a crime that, he probably didn't even commit. So it's the idea that Jesus, they had to find something against Jesus because Jesus was causing too many problems to the wrong people. And so when it comes to Jesus as a religious revolutionary, he challenged authorities, he challenged institutions, he worked on Sabbath, Sabbath. He threw over the tables in the temple. He caused a lot of problems. He preached things different from what they were preaching. So again, when they said throw the stone at the woman, and he found a way around it, things like that annoyed the people in charge. They didn't like it. He had arguments with the scribes, people that wrote the important scriptures. He had arguments with the Pharisees, which were the people in charge who had a lot of power. And eventually he was arrested by the Supreme Court of Justice. So he was arrested by these people eventually because of the trouble that he caused. Political and social revolutionary, he wanted to liberate people from the Roman occupation. Roman occupation was absolutely horrendous, dire circumstances, situations, living conditions. So he wanted to break the people free of this fear and poverty that they were living in. And so Jesus also had some followers with some quite suspicious names. So again, all of this built a picture. So, like CSI, criminal, this idea of you have like a spider's web of things going on and everyone's connected. Well, Jesus obviously in the middle, but it's all the people and all the things that were connected to Jesus, including the people Jesus hung out with, or the people that followed Jesus, including Simon the Zealot and Judas Iscariot. Iscariot means dagger man. Dagger man was another word for zealot. Now, a zealot was somebody that was rebelling against the people in charge. They were rebels. They were in open conflict. And so Jesus associated himself with rebels, with people in open conflict with the people in power. And he also, the final part was Jesus also seemed to do things that were quite political. So, for example, in one of the stories, Jesus comes into Jerusalem on a donkey, oh, good, nice that you could join us. A few people, when he came into Jerusalem on a donkey, people laid cloaks. So people laid cloaks down for the donkey to walk on, so it didn't walk on the dirty ground. And that was a symbolic of King Jehu, who was one of the liberators previously. And then they also laid palm leaves down. And that was again symbolic of the Maccabees. We mentioned the Maccabees with St. Augustine. And the Maccabees were, that was the Manichees, sorry. Not the Maccabees. The Maccabees had liberated 2 centuries earlier. So these were the cloaks and the leaves were symbolic of these ideas of Jesus being important, symbolic of previous liberators that had done amazing things. And so it was believed that this was a political move, fulfilling a prophecy made in Jeremiah of when this happens, this person is going to liberate the people of Israel. And so obviously the Pharisees, the scribes, the authorities think, oh, Jesus is coming into town. Go along to have a look. Well, these massive crowds are doing all these symbolic things to show Jesus as this, this person of power, this liberator of Israel. Who is he liberating them from? These people, the people in charge. So the people in charge were not happy. Now, whether this was all orchestrated, whether this was a political move, whether Jesus's people were saying, right, Jesus, the plan is we're going to go in on this donkey and then we're going to give loads of people these palm leaves and they're going to lay them down. We don't know how it was orchestrated. We don't know how it was orchestrated there, but it's the idea that something was going on. So something was going on while Jesus was representing and fulfilling these prophecies. Right, let's have a quick look. Don't know if you would really need to link Jesus in relationship with the rebels and with the teacher of wisdom. The teacher of wisdom probably would be more of a different section. So the teacher of wisdom would be, you would get a different section. So critically assess how Jesus was seen as a teacher of wisdom, or Jesus was only a teacher, not divine, or something like that. Chances are you wouldn't get a question that make you link the two together. So the question, there has been a previous question in one of the exams, I can't remember what the wording was, but it was specific to the political. So chances are that would be a question on its own rather than something that would be merged. If you did get one where you would merge it, how would you? I would maybe, if you did have to link it, I would go by the fact that Jesus was so influential as far as how he was as a teacher, and then that was how he behaved. That is how then he became noticed and notoriety as far as teacher of wisdom. People listened to him as somebody that knew what he was talking about, and therefore this idea of if he then was going against the religious authorities, the political and social, I would maybe make that link there, but I doubt the exam would specify that link to be made. I hope that makes sense. Yeah, that would work. Yeah, brilliant. Any other questions? Any other questions, folks? Any questions for me? Thanks, Josh. No problem. So with this topic, I'm a little bit over than what I normally am. It's a little bit longer, but it is one that you can get your teeth stuck into. So it is a really good topic, is this one. Once I've done the next 3 topics, so we've got moral principles next week, and then moral action. Moral action is really good as well, Bonhoeffer. So they're the final 2. So we've broke the cusp of these now. We've done 4. We've got the final 2 to do. I will then set another essay choice where you pick one. So if when we meet again, I'm not going to sing the VE song, but when we meet again, if we have the sections of the revision book completed and at least 1, if not 2 DCT essays under our belt that have been, with feedback, that's a fantastic position for us to be in. So just keep working through the different modules at your own speed, filling out that revision pack that I sent as a structure for what you need to do, and have a go at that essay and let me know if you need help with the essay. No and no. Otherwise, if there are no other questions, I really appreciate your thoughts today, your questions, very, very good questions. And otherwise, next week, moral principles at 11. And any problems, like I said, just send me an email. Thanks very much, everyone. Thanks. Bye, guys. Bye.